She said it before I'd even taken a step toward the counter. I was standing just inside the door of the Yellowstone Street Diner on a Tuesday morning in October, still cold from the walk from my truck, still deciding whether I wanted the booth or the counter, and she looked up from across the room and said it without preamble, without embarrassment, with the particular directness of someone who has decided to stop waiting. "I was hoping you'd sit down. Not at the counter. At her table." She had a coffee and a plate of eggs and an empty chair across from her, and she was looking at me in the way of someone who has already done the calculation and arrived at a result they are prepared to stand behind. I stood in the doorway for a second. Then I sat down. I don't know precisely what made me do it without hesitating. Something about the specific quality of the invitation, maybe. It wasn't performance. It wasn't flirtation in the practiced sense. It was just honest. She had wanted me to sit down. She said so. And I was 34 years old and had spent the last 4 months trying to figure out what I wanted my life to look like when I was actually present in it. And someone saying a true thing with no decoration seemed like exactly the right note to walk toward. I sat down. She said, "I already ordered. I hope you like eggs." I said, "I do." And that was how it started. My name is Cal Briggs. I'm 34 years old and I work as a wildlife biologist for the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks, based out of Bozeman. I have held this job for 7 years. The work takes me into the field for long stretches, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, monitoring ungulate populations in remote areas, tagging and tracking, working with land managers and ranchers on habitat questions. It is work that I love in the deep, non-negotiable way that some people love things that cost them something. It costs me winters sometimes. It has cost me more than that. Last year I spent 6 months at a field station in the Beartooth Range running a population study on elk corridors. No reliable cell service. Satellite phone for emergencies. Supply drops every 3 weeks. The work was good, the best I'd done, scientifically. And when I came back to Bozeman in February, I found a letter on the kitchen counter from my girlfriend of 4 years. Her name was Dana. The letter was honest and kind, and it said, among other things, that she had waded through 2 long field deployments already and she had understood for a while that this was what being with me meant, and she had finally understood that it wasn't what she wanted her life to mean. She wished me well. She had already moved to Portland. She hoped I found someone who fit the life I had built. I did not blame her. I had always known, in the way you know things you don't examine closely, that the long absences were a tax the relationship paid. Dana had paid it without complaint for years, and then she had quietly stopped. I put the letter down on the kitchen counter and stood in my empty apartment and thought, she's right. And then I thought, what do I want this to look like when I'm actually here? I'd been trying to answer that question for 4 months when I walked into the Yellowstone Street Diner, and a woman with flowers still in her hair told me she'd been hoping I'd sit down. I'd seen Wren Callahan a dozen times over those 4 months. Her bakery, Common Ground, was 3 doors down from the diner, and I'd been going there for coffee in the mornings when I worked from the office in town, which happened 2 or 3 times a week. She was usually behind the counter or coming out of the kitchen, quick and decisive in the way of someone who runs a kitchen. And she had a way of handing over a cup of coffee that felt like she'd been paying attention to exactly how you needed it even though she'd never asked. We'd talk the way you talk to a business owner you see regularly, pleasantries. A question about the week, occasional brief exchanges about the mountains or the weather, or what was coming out of the kitchen that day. She'd given me a piece of cardamom bread one Friday because she said she'd made too much and it was going to go stale. I told her it was the best thing I'd eaten in a month, which was true, and which had made her look at me with a small, appraising expression that I'd thought about later without deciding to. I didn't know she'd been watching for me at the diner. I didn't know she'd ordered for 2. I found that out when the waiter brought my plate and she said, simply, "I ordered your eggs when I ordered mine." I didn't know if you'd come in today, but I thought if you did, the seat should already be taken care of. I looked at her across the table. "How did you know what I'd want?" I said. She picked up her coffee. "Scrambled, no cheese, wheat toast. You order it every time you come to the counter at Common Ground and there's nothing else on the menu board." I looked at the eggs. "Scrambled, no cheese, wheat toast. You remember everyone's order." I said. She looked at me steadily over the rim of her cup. Not everyone's, she said. Her name was Wren Callahan. She told me that morning, and she'd opened Common Ground 5 years ago with her savings and a business loan, and a recipe her grandmother had given her for a sourdough starter that was now, she said, older than she was. She'd grown up in Missoula, moved to Bozeman for culinary school, stayed. She was 33. She'd been running the bakery on her own for the first 2 years and had brought in a business partner, Sasha Klein, for the expansion into wholesale accounts 3 years ago. They were now, she said carefully, 6 months away from opening a second location. That's a lot to carry, I said. It's everything, she said, with a clarity that was neither complaint nor performance, just a statement of what was true. I've been building toward it for 5 years. I think about it when I wake up at 4 to start the first proofs. I think about it when I'm going over the numbers at night. There's not a lot of room for anything else right now. She looked at me when she said that last part, direct, not apologetic. Why did you order for 2? I asked. A pause. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Because I've been watching you come in for 4 months and I've been telling myself there's no time for this, and I've been right about that, and I've been unhappy about being right. She looked up. So this morning I decided to order for 2 and see what happened. What would you have done if I'd sat at the counter? Eaten 2 breakfasts, she said, and felt appropriately foolish. I looked at the mountains through the diner window, the October snow still high on the bridges, the morning light doing the thing it does in Montana when the air is clear and cold. I came back from 6 months in the field in February, I said. My girlfriend had left while I was gone. She was right to. I kept my eyes on the mountains. I've been trying to figure out what I want my life to look like when I'm actually in it. That's what the last 4 months have been. Wren was quiet for a moment. And I think I want to sit down more, I said. She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small unlocking. That's a good answer, she said. We ate our eggs. We talked for an hour. I was late to my first meeting, which I did not regret. The weeks after that Tuesday were the kind that build without you designing them. She was open Tuesday through Saturday, 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I worked in the field Monday and Wednesday, and Tuesdays and Thursdays in the office. I found myself rearranging the Thursday fieldwork to Tuesdays without examining why too closely, which meant I was in town on Thursday mornings, which meant I was at Common Ground's counter on Thursday mornings, which meant I saw her twice a week instead of once. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it for 3 weeks. Then one Thursday she put my coffee on the counter and said, without looking up from the till, "You changed your schedule." "I'm in town more," I said, "on Thursdays specifically." "Thursdays have a lot going for them," I said. She looked up. The corner of her mouth moved. "I start the croissants on Thursdays," she said, "just so you know." "That does explain it," I said. She handed me a croissant warm on a paper sleeve. Didn't charge for it. I sat at the counter and ate it while she worked, and neither of us said anything else, but the room had a quality to it that was different from the week before. Something that had been building had arrived at a new floor. We started having breakfast together on the days she could take a break mid-morning, when the early rush was done and before the lunch prep began. 15 minutes, sometimes 20. She'd come out of the kitchen with flour on her apron and coffee for both of us and sit across the counter from me and talk about what the morning had been. A batch of rye that hadn't come up right. A wholesale account that had doubled their order. A new pastry she'd been testing, which she made me try before she'd committed to it. I ate 6 different iterations of a maple walnut Danish over 2 weeks. She gave me a look when I told her I'd liked version 3 best. "Everyone likes version 3, she said, slightly exasperated. "Version 3 is the compromise. I'm trying to make something better than the compromise." "What's wrong with the compromise?" I said. "Everything," she said, and went back to the kitchen. She brought me version 7 the following Thursday. I tried it and didn't say anything for a moment. "Well," she said. "You were right about 3, I said. She threw a dish towel at me. I caught it. We both laughed, the kind of laugh that happens when 2 people have been building towards something without naming it, and the unnamed thing is suddenly, briefly, visible. I told her about the field work. Not the data, the texture of it. 6 months in the Beartooths with a crew of two, the elk moving through corridors I'd spent years trying to understand. The specific quality of a December dawn at 8,000 feet when the air was so cold and clear it felt like something you could hold. She listened the way she looked at things she was deciding about with real attention, not the polite version. "Do you miss it when you're back?" she said. "Yes," I said, "but I miss being back when I'm there too. I used to think that meant I hadn't figured out what I wanted. I think now it means I want both." She looked at me. "Both is complicated." "I know," I said. "I'm still working out how to do it." "What does working it out look like so far?" "Rearranging my schedule," I said. "Eating a lot of croissants." She looked down at the counter. A small, real smile. "That's a start," she said. The conversations got longer. She'd pull a stool around to the counter side and we'd both face the front windows and the mountains behind them, drinking coffee while the mid-morning light shifted. She told me about culinary school, the way she'd been the only person in her program who was more interested in bread than in anything else, which the instructors had found limiting and she had found clarifying. She said the sourdough starter she'd inherited from her grandmother was called a leaner because it had survived 3 moves and 2 bad years and deserved a name with some dignity. "Does a leaner have opinions?" I asked. "Strong ones," Ren said. "She doesn't like being rushed. She doesn't perform for you. She rises when she's ready and not before, and if you've been paying attention you can usually tell when that's going to be." "Sounds like someone I know," I said. She looked at me sideways, didn't answer, but she was smiling at her coffee. One Thursday morning she asked me about the elk corridors, what they were, what studying them meant practically. I explained. Certain routes through the landscape that elk return to generation after generation, paths shaped by terrain and water and the accumulated memory of thousands of years of migration. They look like nothing to an untrained eye. You have to learn to read the signs, the tracks, the browse patterns, the way the grass grows differently where animals move through regularly. "How long does it take to learn to read them?" she asked. "Years," I said. "You're always learning. The landscape changes, the herd changes, you're always updating your understanding." She was quiet for a moment, watching 2 magpies on the windowsill outside. "That's what bread is like," she said. "You think you understand a formula and then the humidity changes or the flour is from a different harvest and you have to learn it again." "Then we're both in the same business," I said. She turned to look at me, paying attention to things that won't stand still. "Yes," I said. She picked up her coffee. The magpies flew. The mountains sat behind everything, as they always do in Montana, enormous and patient and entirely unconcerned. On a Saturday in late October, she asked if I wanted to come to the bakery before it opened. Not as a grand invitation. She said she was testing a new bread formula, and she could use a second opinion, and she didn't trust Sasha's palate because Sasha didn't eat carbohydrates on principle. I arrived at 4:30 in the morning and stood in the warm dark of the bakery kitchen, while Ren moved around it with the focused ease of someone in a room they have made entirely their own. The smell was extraordinary, bread and butter and something deeper underneath, the specific warmth of a kitchen that has been used with care for years. She gave me jobs that required no skill. "Hold this, time this, tell me if this smells done." I held and timed and smelled. At 6, when the first loaves came out, she put a piece on the counter in front of me, still steaming with butter because she said it wasn't fair to judge bread without butter. I ate it and said nothing for a moment. "Don't be diplomatic," she said. "It's the best bread I've ever had," I said. She looked at the loaf. "It's not," she said. "Not yet, but it's close." I watched her make a note in the small notebook she kept on the counter, adjustments, quantities, timing. Her handwriting was exact. Her attention was complete. I thought about the elk corridors, the way you could spend years trying to understand a path that was already there, already being traveled, and the work was just to make yourself still enough to see it. I thought, she's already there. She's been there. I just needed to sit down. That evening, driving back to the apartment, I passed the Yellowstone Street diner and slowed without meaning to. The booth where we'd had eggs was visible from the street, empty now. I'd sat down on a Tuesday morning because someone had been honest with me before I'd decided anything, and in the weeks since, I had become, without quite noticing it, someone with a standing order at a bakery, and a reason to prefer Thursdays and a notebook in my truck where I'd started writing down things she said that I didn't want to forget. I thought about Dana's letter. I hoped you'd find someone who fit the life you'd built. I thought, maybe the question was never about fitting the life I'd built. Maybe it was about building a different one. I drove home. I fell asleep quickly, which I had not been doing reliably for 4 months. The next Thursday, I rearranged my schedule again. Sasha found me on a Wednesday. I was at the counter of Common Ground alone. Ren was in the back with a delivery, and Sasha came out of the office and sat down across from me with the specific posture of someone who has decided to have a conversation and is not going to be argued out of it. Sasha Klein was 37 precise, the kind of person who had built 3 businesses before 40 and spoke about the 4th with the authority of someone who had earned their certainty. She'd been Ren's business partner for 3 years and her skeptic for longer than that. "I'm going to say something directly," she said. "All right," I said. "Ren has done this before," she said. "Let someone in during a critical stretch." It cost her a lease on her first expansion location because she was distracted at the wrong time and missed a deadline that couldn't be recovered. That's why we don't have 3 locations right now instead of one moving toward 2. She put her hands flat on the counter. "She's 6 months from the second opening. She's never worked harder. I don't want her to lose focus now." I looked at my coffee. "I'm not asking her to lose focus." "You don't have to ask," Sasha said. "She does it anyway. When she's in, she's all the way in, and she can't afford all the way in right now." "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to be honest about whether you're serious, because if you're going to disappear into a field station for 6 months again while she's building something, she needs to know that before she's already invested." I looked at her. "The person who made her miss that deadline," I said. "What happened with him?" Something shifted in Sasha's expression quickly, controlled. "Left for a job in Seattle," she said. 3 months in, he wasn't wrong to go, he just could have been honest about it sooner." "I'm not going to Seattle," I said. "You went to the Beartooths for 6 months." "I did," I said, "and I'm working out what that means going forward, but I came back to Bozeman. I've been here 4 months. I rearranged my schedule to be in town more, not for the coffee." I looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I know I haven't earned that yet. I'm just asking you not to make the decision for her." Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a different tone, quieter, more honest, "She talked about you before you sat down at that table, for about 3 weeks before. She'd come into the office on Thursdays and I'd know she'd seen you because she'd be in a good mood and then correct for it." She looked at the counter. "She works too hard and she's been alone too long, and I don't want it to be someone who's going to make that worse." "Neither do I," I said. She stood up. "Fine," she said. "I've said my piece." She started toward the office, then stopped. "The bread she made this week, she tested it at 4:30 in the morning." "I know," I said. "I was there." Sasha looked at me for a beat, then she went back to the office. Ren came out from the back 10 minutes later and found me still at the counter. She read my face. "She talked to you." "She did." She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm sorry. She means well." She loves you," I said, "and she's scared on your behalf. That's not something to apologize for." Ren put both hands on the counter and looked at the surface for a moment. "She's not wrong about the other time," she said. "I lost something I'd worked for because I wasn't paying attention." "What would paying attention and this look like at the same time?" I asked. She looked up. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't tried it." "I'd like to try it with you," I said, "if that's something you want." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the morning light was coming off the bridgers, clean and cold, the kind of light that makes Montana look like an argument for staying. "You rearranged your schedule," she said. "I did." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. "About 6 months in the Beartooths and a letter on a kitchen counter and 4 months of trying to understand what it meant to be present in your own life. About scrambled eggs remembered and flour in someone's hair and a piece of bread that wasn't quite perfect yet but was the closest to perfect I'd tasted. Because the best part of being in town," I said, "is being here." She held my gaze. Something in her face settled. Then she came around the counter. I had planned to drive out to the field station that weekend, routine check on some monitoring equipment. Nothing that needed doing urgently, the kind of task that fills a Saturday when you don't have somewhere else to be. I was sitting in my truck outside Common Ground on Friday afternoon looking at the mountains when she tapped on the passenger window. I rolled it down. "The second location," she said. "The building, I'd like you to see it." I looked at her. "Now, if you have time." I had time. I turned off the engine. The building was on the east side of downtown, a former hardware store with high ceilings and original wood floors and windows that faced the Bridger Range in a way that seemed deliberate. It was empty. It smelled like old wood and the particular kind of dust that accumulates in a room that has been waiting. Wren walked through it the way she moved through her kitchen, purposeful, attentive, already seeing something I couldn't see yet. "The kitchen would be here," she said, standing at the back wall. "The front counter along this side. The seating, I'm thinking round tables, mismatched chairs, nothing that looks like a chain." She turned. "I want it to feel like a place people come back to." "It will," I said. "You'll make it that." She looked at the front windows, the mountains framed in them. "6 months," she said. "Sasha says I'm on track, but the last 6 months are always the hardest because that's when things go wrong you didn't plan for." "Things always go wrong you didn't plan for," I said. "In fieldwork too." "Constantly," I said. "You plan as well as you can and then you stay flexible. The ones who can't adapt are the ones who lose the study." She moved from the back wall to the front windows and stood looking at the mountains. Late afternoon, the light amber and specific. I watched her from across the empty room and thought about what Sasha had said. She talked about you for 3 weeks before the diner. 3 weeks of wanting to say something and choosing the right moment. And ordered breakfast for 2 as an act of deliberate hope. "Alina started the same way," she said quietly, still facing the mountains. "The sourdough starter, the bakery, Common Ground." She turned from the window. "I had the recipe and the savings and the loan and I had no idea if it would work. I just decided to act on the hope before I had the confirmation." She looked at me. "It's the only way I know how to do things." "Order for 2, I said. She smiled. "Order for 2. I walked across the room to where she was standing. The floorboards were original, slightly uneven, the kind that would need sanding before the space opened, but that told you something real about the building, that it had been here, that it had been used, that it had accumulated the weight of time and was still standing under it. "I've been in Bozeman 7 years, I said. "I've spent a lot of them in the field. I came back from the last deployment and everything I thought I was building here was different, and I've been trying to understand what I actually want my life to look like." I stopped in front of her. "You ordered for 2. I sat down. "And in the 2 months since then I've been in town more, I've been present in a way I wasn't before, and I've been better, in a way that has nothing to do with the field work and everything to do with Thursdays." She was very still. "I'm not going to Seattle," I said. "I'm not going anywhere that matters. I go to the Beartooths and I come back and I want to keep coming back to something specific." She looked at the windows, then back at me. "6 months," she said. "I can't give you very much of myself for 6 months." "I know," I said. "I'll be here anyway." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," I said. "That's the point." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the mountains were doing what mountains do in Montana in October, just existing, with total indifference to everything beneath them, vast and cold and certain. "I was hoping you'd sit down," she said. I looked at her. "I was hoping you'd sit down. Not at a diner table this time. Not about eggs." She was saying it about all of it, about Bozeman, about the 6 months ahead, about the building full of old wood and mountain light, about whether I was the kind of person who stayed. I put my hands on her face carefully, the way you hold something you've been patient for. "I sat down the first time," I said. "I'm not getting up." She kissed me in the empty building in the late afternoon light with the Bridger Range framed in the windows and the smell of old wood and possibility around us. When she pulled back, she was smiling. Not the small, controlled smile she used when she was being careful. The full one, unguarded. "6 months," she said. "6 months," I said. "The opening and then the rest of it." She looked at the windows. "Sasha is going to make a comment." "Sasha already made her comment," I said. "I think I passed." Wren raised an eyebrow. "She didn't tell me that." "She told me you talked about me for 3 weeks before the diner," I said. "She said you come in on Thursdays in a good mood and then correct for it." Wren's expression went briefly, deeply embarrassed. "She had no business telling you that." "I'm very glad she did," I said. The 6 months happened the way hard things do when you've prepared for them honestly, full of the unexpected and survivable. The permitting for the second location hit a delay in November that pushed the timeline by 3 weeks. A supplier contract fell through in December. In January, the kitchen equipment Wren had spec'd for the new space was backordered until March, and there was a week where she came to the counter every morning looking like someone who had not slept, and was making up for it by knowing exactly what needed to happen next. I brought dinner to the bakery 2 Tuesdays in a row that January, after close, and she ate it at the prep counter while going over invoices because she was too tired to do one thing at a time. I sat across from her and looked at the invoices when she asked me to and held things and made coffee and otherwise stayed out of the way. "You're very good at this," she said one night, "being here without needing anything." "Field work," I said. "You learn to be useful without being in the way." She looked at me over the invoice printout. "That's not just field work." "No," I said, "it's also just you." She went back to the invoice. But she reached across and put her hand on mine for a moment before she did. Sasha stopped being skeptical somewhere in February. Not dramatically, she didn't announce it, but she started leaving a second coffee on the counter when I came in on Thursdays without being asked, and one morning she said while passing through, "The bread formula she's been working on, she nailed it last week." "I know," I said. "She called me at midnight." Sasha looked at me. Something in her expression relaxed all the way. "Good," she said and kept walking. In March, I drove Wren out to the field station on a Sunday, not during a deployment, just to see it. She'd asked what the work looked like when I was in it, and the station was the closest I could bring her without waiting for months. It was a simple structure, a converted Forest Service cabin, with a covered porch looking out over a valley that carried a creek in the low part, and in the distance, the first serious ridgelines of the Beartooths. She stood on the porch for a while without saying anything. "It's very quiet," she said. "That's most of it," I said, "the quiet and the watching." "Do you talk to anyone when you're out here?" "The crew," I said. "Two of us usually. We're not talkers." I leaned against the railing. "We have a communication protocol. Morning check-in, evening summary. In between, mostly silence." She looked out at the valley. A pair of ravens were doing something complicated near the tree line. "I think I would like it," she said, "in small doses." "You could come," I said, "not during a deployment, but in the off-season if you wanted to see the valley." She turned to look at me. "You'd want that?" "Yes," I said. "I want you to know this part of it, not just the schedule rearranging and the croissants." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I've never seen you in this." "In what?" She gestured at the mountains, the valley, the cabin, all of it. "Where you actually live," she said. "The full thing." I thought about that. About the years I'd kept the field work separate. Dana had never come to a station either, had never asked to, and I hadn't thought to suggest it. The field was mine. The apartment was ours. I had kept those two things in separate rooms. "I didn't always let people in," I said, "to this part." "Why now?" I looked at the valley. The ravens had settled in the tree line. The light was doing something specific in the way it hit the far ridge. "Because sitting down means sitting all the way down," I said. "Not just in the diner." She put her hand in mine there on the porch of the field station with the Beartooths at our backs. We stood there for a while before we drove back. Common Ground's second location opened on a Friday in April. Small gathering, regulars from the original, the wholesale accounts, a few friends. Wren stood behind the new counter in her apron looking like someone who had spent 5 years building toward a particular moment and was now inside it and wasn't quite sure what to do with the feeling. I was near the back. She found me in the small crowd, and the look on her face when she did was the same look she'd worn in the diner that October morning, the one that had nothing performed in it. Just true. Sasha appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of the sparkling cider they'd put out for the opening. "She's been like that for an hour," she said, looking at Wren, "waiting to find you in the room." "I know," I said. Sasha handed me one of the glasses. "I was wrong about you," she said, not elaborating, just saying it. "You were right to be careful," I said. She considered that. "He left in March," she said. "The one before, he said he was going to Seattle for 2 months and he never came back. She'd moved suppliers to his neighborhood to be closer to him." She shook her head. "She didn't tell anyone for 6 weeks." "She told me," I said. Sasha looked at me. "Not all of it," I said, "but enough. She's not someone who hides the hard parts well once she trusts you." Sasha was quiet for a moment, then she raised her glass. To the second location, she said. And the third, I said. Eventually, she almost smiled. Don't push it. The spring field season started in May. I drove out to the field station on a Monday morning, the mountains still carrying snow at the high elevations, the valleys opening into the particular green that only happens in Montana in May when the winter is finally done. I called Wren when I got signal on the highway. I'm heading out, I said. I know, she said. Text when you're at the station. The new bread recipe, I said. Save me a loaf. There will be approximately 12 loaves saved for you, she said. I've been baking at an unreasonable rate. That's not a problem, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then, come back. I will, I said. I always do now. I drove into the mountains with the morning light on the peaks and the radio fading out in the kind of quiet that used to feel like enough on its own. It still felt like enough. It also felt like something to come back from. That was the difference. That was the whole of it. She had hoped I'd sit down. I did. And I kept sitting down. Every time in the diner, in the bakery kitchen before dawn, in the empty building with the mountain light windows, on the porch of the field station with the valley spreading below us, in the truck on the highway calling to say I was on my way out and on my way back. Sitting down, it turned out, was not a single moment. It was a choice you made every morning when you woke up and decided where to be. I knew where to be.